interesting
Richard,
story.
how I want to get a quick question in. In your view, under your philosophy, under your sense of prescriptions, how could things have gone better for more people in Youngstown and in similar places? You know, the prototypical story that we're talking about. What should have happened instead of what did happen?
Oh, that's a great question. There are at least two things that should have happened, in my view, and that could have changed the history of Youngstown, of Ohio, of the whole Midwestern industrial, Detroit, Cleveland, all of that. Two things I would say. Number one, a rational planning mechanism for what to do about a pretty well-known problem. Capitalism's been around for 300-400 years if you date it in the 17th, 18th century in England, and then it spreads. Wherever it has spread, it shows a pretty similar history. Whatever the industry is that gets them off the ground, whether it's cotton textiles or it's iron and steel or it's railroads, those things peter out. After 10 years, 20, 40, 60 sometimes, capitalism is a very dynamic system. It'll move on. It'll move on to a different industry. It'll move on to a different technology. It'll move on to a different region of the world. Nobody is or should be surprised by this. You ought to be able, therefore, to conceptually sit down and say, okay, what are we going to do so that when the shift comes to a new technology or a new region, we don't leave disaster in its wake. We don't see all the capital vanish, move to another place. Good news for the place it moves to, but a disaster for the place it left behind. That doesn't have to happen. And we even know some cases where it worked out in the sense, not by planning, but by the way the market works, which means we're talking 30, 40 years of misery, and then slowly out of the misery comes a new plant, a new industry for a while. New England was once an industrial area. It isn't that anymore. It becomes healthcare or research or university. All of those things could have been, should have been worked out through a national conversation and a national planning program. The second thing I would argue, which is even more important for me, is that, and here my Marxism comes. I mean, this is not me. I didn't invent any of this. I'm just applying what I learned from a good teacher. Many good teachers, but Marx was one of them. You cannot organize an economic system that purports to serve what people need if you don't put the people in charge. There is something fundamentally amiss in organizing enterprises in the following specifically capitalist way. A very small group of people sit at the top of virtually every business, large, medium, small. Whether you call them the owner or the owning family or the partnership or the corporation, it is a very small group of people. Board of directors of typical corporations have 15 men and women on them. Major shareholders, about the same number. But the employees, the vast mass of us, we are in a subordinate position. We do not elect the people who run the enterprise. We have no authority to recall them if they perform in a way we don't want. And so we have a system in which the mass of the apparatus of production, of the goods and services without which we cannot survive, is controlled by a tiny, unaccountable minority of people. If you look at the population statistics of the U.S. Census, employers in this country are less than 1% of the people. Employees is everybody else. And we allow a 1% unelected, unaccountable minority to make all the decisions. They decided to leave Youngstown, that tiny group. And the rest of Youngstown, my family included, was left without a job, without a future. Many of the people of Youngstown that I grew up with moved to Detroit and Cleveland, where they went through the same thing again 5 or 10 years later. I mean, and you know this story because it has proliferated for the last 75 years. So my argument, I'll end with this. My argument is we have an economic system that works for the people who run it. It works perfectly nicely for them, but not for us. And if we want the system to work better for us, then we have to be in charge. And what you need is a worker cooperative to run the business, not a capitalist enterprise that puts all that unaccountable power at the top. And for a country that talks about democracy every fourth word, to face the following reality, which I doubt you can refute, that we have organized the production of goods and services in enterprises that have never allowed democracy in the front door. When you walk across the threshold into your factory or your office or your store, you give up your democratic rights. You are told, sit over there, work with that machine, do that, and at 5 o'clock, get your rear end out of here, go home, watch TV, 2 pieces of pizza, and come back tomorrow and do it all again. Whoa, this is not what democracy ever meant. And if you don't organize your economy that way, how do you claim that your society is democratic?
What do you have to say then?
Yeah, I'm going to say something. I'm not going to try to rebut this well-polished and well-rehearsed indictment of the current order of politics and economics. I'm not going to try to rebut it. I hear it. I understand it. I want to ask some questions, though.
Please.
I want you to deal with the concerns initially articulated by Friedrich von Hayek about planning and the problems with planning, with centralized planning, about the information, about the politicization of economic decisions. And I want you to address that. I don't have to spell it out any further than that. The other thing I want to say, though, is that if I have a business, I start a business, I have some capital, I open up an enterprise, and I hire some people, it's still my business. That's my property. The fact that I entered into a labor relationship with somebody did not give them title over my property. What is it that's so special? Here's my question about the employment relationship. Now, if I'm selling them widgets and they're buying widgets from me, I don't get a vote on their board of directors because I'm selling them widgets. If I'm buying from them in large bulk and keeping them afloat, I likewise don't own their company. Why is it that a worker, in virtue of working, is entitled to have some say about what I do with my property, including picking it up and moving it from Ohio to Arizona?
Okay. Which do you want me to respond to first?
Hayek.
Hayek. Okay. Let's begin with one premise. Are there problems with planning? Absolutely. There are problems, as far as I can gather, having studied this all my life, with every particular system that we have so far seen the human race create, whether it's ancient village economies, slave systems, feudal systems, capitalist systems. They're unique and they're distinct one from the other, but problems they all have. We're not going to, well, let's put it another way. If you're searching for the economic system that has no problems, I wish you every good luck imaginable, but I doubt you'll find them, because what you're doing is searching for elephants in the Berkshires, and I happen to know there aren't any there. It's like with if you advise teenagers about love and marriage, and they say, well, I'm so unhappy because I'm single, I want to go find a partner and be connected. And you have to explain to them gently and warmly, I hope, that when you get married, you do not end your problems. You are exchanging one set of problems, those that go with single life, for another set. But if you're hoping that you'll have no problems, then the prospects for your marriage are not really that good, because you're going to be upset. So yeah, socialism or whatever comes after capitalism will have its problems, its contradictions, its dynamics. Mr. Hayek tried to suggest that there was the following kind of problem. The central authority, the planners, but just a footnote here, no one in the world of socialist planning ever imagined or affirmed, to my knowledge, that the planning of a socialist economic system would have to be done at the top. The practical matter in Russia and several other countries was that they did it that way. That was a choice they made. But there can be decentralized planning. There can be mixtures of centralized and decentralized planning. And by the way, as socialists have jokingly said to themselves a million times, the best examples of planning are not the ones that the Russians and the Chinese have accomplished. It's the ones that were accomplished by the Walmart Corporation, by GE, who took an immense amount of operational decision-making out of the market. Let's remember, when companies merge, when companies acquire another one, if you talk to them, they'll tell you they don't want to rely on the uncertainties of the market. It's too risky. They need to bring inside their planning operation what was
this is
before.
Coast. This is Ronald Coast. This is Oliver Williamson.
That's right. That's right. So let me simply say we have two reasons to look at this in a different way. When you do planning, you will make mistakes. When you don't do planning, you will make mistakes. The mistake Mr. Hayek made was to imagine that the debate was which system didn't make mistakes. And if, with all due respect to a person who can't defend himself, I think that's nuts. There is no such system. There we go back with the elephants in the Berkshires. There's loads of mistakes made when you decentralize in each little entrepreneur the decision, what am I to do? You make a decision that undercut, for example, if I leave Youngstown, I make my decision. But that means that the local bowling alley has nobody going there to throw the ball down the alley. And therefore, I'm going to drive that person out of business. I didn't want that. I didn't intend it. That may not be good for 27 things. But to justify it all as if, in the end, by some magic, this all turns out to be efficient, well, that's silly. You know,
Okay.